facilitator this evening. Tonight, we are discussing the theme from garden to market. And we want to know what that looks like. Joining us is our main speaker, Eckhart Förtsch, an organic farmer on Olifantwater West, with nearly a decade of experience in organic livestock and vegetable production, and a weekly supplier of various Windhoek markets, taking his produce there and so on. Eckhart has also led the Namibia Organic Association as a chairperson of the board from 2020 to 2023, and is currently serving as a vice chairperson. Welcome, Eckhart.
Great. Thank you, Rapura. Appreciate the introductions, and yeah, really looking forward to this evening. I've been busy with my horticulture operation for a number of years already, and actually I've been selling out of this and out of the garden my produce. And it's actually one part of a relatively diversified operation. Yeah. And I really want to delve into the market garden experiences. Before we really get into this, I want to make sure that you all understand I'm not perfect. I'm not the expert on the topic. However, I think the lessons that I did learn and the mistakes that together to turn this opportunity around into something. As you all know, Namibia is a nutrition challenged country. It's really a task that all of us need to take on very very fervently.
Wonderful.
So yeah,
nice to have you. So in today's session, we will have a 10 to 15 minutes introductions and so on, and then for the next 40 to 45 minutes, we will have the main discussion where Eckhart will delve into tonight's theme, and then 30 minutes after that, we will have 30 minutes of questions and answers, where participants will be able to ask Eckhart questions and pick his brain a little bit, or a whole lot if we have the time. I will please ask guests to post their questions in the chat room, and we will attend to them in our Q&A session. And then also, I will ask everyone to please mute their mics unless they are permitted to speak, after which they should mute again. So before Eckhart takes over, just to set some context, our theme tonight invites us to closely look at the journey of food, from when the seed is planted up until it reaches a household, a restaurant, or a community market. In Namibia, this journey is not always straightforward. Most of the vegetable produce in our shops is produced conventionally, and most of it is also imported from South Africa and other countries. At the same time, many Namibians are starting gardens, exploring small-scale gardening, and trying to find their place in the market. There's a lot of challenges that Namibian garden pioneers are facing, which is limited market access, for example, and competition against large-scale producers who have the advantage of economies of scale. And then we also have a challenge of having a consumer base that is often unaware of the benefits or of the value of locally grown produce. So our goal tonight is to not only understand the challenges along this journey, but also the practical steps that can transform a simple garden harvest into a market-ready product and ultimately into a sustainable income. So Eckhart, when we talk about from garden to market in Namibia, what does that full journey look like?
All right, great. Yeah, I guess maybe a quick introduction to my operation. I've actually came back to Namibia to our family farm in 2005 onto 6. And my garden journey started around 2014-15 and has been growing since. It's currently relatively stagnant at the current size of 0.6 hectares. Much of the food that we produce is for sale and for own consumption. That has a very clear purpose. I want to eat as well as I can on the farm. We've got the resources, and we're going to talk about the resources tonight. but I also want to really, produce good produce, quality produce with a high nutrient profile to my customers, which are mostly in Windhoek, which is my market. So we'll also be talking a little bit about, our target markets, who is, how to find markets, who are the candidates that are most suitable for that. So not sure if we want to go around with the round of introduction. Maybe if anybody wants to voice particular needs or things that they want to get information on that I may not have covered, I want to add that if it's not included in the slides. Not sure, Rapura, do you feel we have time for that, or should we delve into it?
No, we still have time. I think everybody can give a brief introduction of themselves and what they expect from this Permiechat.
Okay, great. Will you go ahead and do the rounds? You see who's available or who's on the screen, and then, yeah, probably just a reminder, you're all muted right now. So just unmute yourself in a quick introduction.
I think I will start, and then we just go down.
Okay, great.
So, as I said, my name is Ripura Hevike. I am a garden manager at a Steps for Children agroforest in Okakarara. We practice regenerative, organic, sustainable agroforestry, and yeah, I think that is it. Maybe Christian can go next.
Christiane?
Hallo, hört ihr mich?
Yeah.
Yeah, hello, good evening, everybody. I'm Christiane Hilbert. I've been actually a farmer's wife for nearly over 20 years, but 10 years I wasn't here, back on the farm permanently. And I've got my own little garden here, and I'm just very interested to see how one can get the food to the market. I love gardening and being outside, got my banana circle going. A little bit of permaculture, and yeah, totally excited to what else I can do on the farm. And yeah, trying to be self-sustainable for me and my family and my children, and I've always got a bit of excess of vegetables in my garden.
Wonderful. Imo, you want to go?
Yeah, so I'm Imo, mostly here because of Living Earth. One of the things we want to do with Living Earth is to try and be a market maker. So we try to create the link between producers and consumers and help more of our small scale producers to be successful. Thank you, Ripura.
Wonderful. Peter Allen?
Hi, okay, Peter Allen. I live in Walvis Bay, work in Swakopmund, and I got a plot outside of Swakopmund where I'm I'll say a part-time chicken egg farmer. I run a service station. That's my job, and I'm actually very interested to hear how market gardening in Namibia compares to what I've read, because everything I get, all the information I find is in the northern hemisphere, where obviously they got rain and they got these a lot of population. I'm very interested to hear how this compares to what I've read so far. So yeah.
Wonderful. Ailey, yeah.
Oh yeah. Good evening. Ailey Nampala. I'm just a backyard gardener, and I'm here to learn.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ailey. Anthony?
Anthony Bessinger. I'm Peter Allen's neighbor in Swakop as well. I farm using aquaponics, producing mainly in Swakop. And then I've got a 3-hectare lease in Kavango where I'm doing cash crops. I'm trying to set it as an organic farm, but initially for the first harvest, I've gone the conventional farming route. And then I'm also busy with a community project in Tinsabus area, also to set up horticulture, but more with the Sun community. But that is very early phases.
Wonderful. Karen, we have about 4 minutes. I think we can run through introductions, and then if, at 7:45, if we are not done, then we can just get into the discussion. Karen, you can go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Karen. I'm as well part of Living Earth. So one of my big interests is to learn from Eckhart Förtsch to make this profitable, especially as Peter Allen said here in Namibia, where we have not that much water. I am mainly a beginner in gardening, and we have communal land as well in here, 20 hectare that we want to make or transform into a profitable farm at some point in time. That's it.
Wonderful. Jürgen Volkmann. Or Gunther.
Just remember to unmute yourself. And I think Peter Allen has his hands up. Maybe he wanted to add something to his introduction.
Yeah, no, Peter can go.
Sorry, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay. Who else wants to introduce themselves before we continue? We still have 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kita Fernandez. I'm very, very new to permaculture, agroforestry, all of that. But I really would like to learn because I plan on starting my own food forest. I've recently bought a 10-hectare plot to work on.
Wonderful. Who else wants to go?
Okay, good. Gunther's now on. I didn't know how to handle my cell phone. I'm currently in Otapi. I'm attending to this vocational training school offering agricultural qualifications. So it's an experience, and I think Eki knows what I'm talking about. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Gunther. Good that you're here. So, without further ado, I think Eckhart can delve into tonight's theme, and we can hear and learn a lot from him. Eckhart, you can proceed.
Okay, thank you, Rapura. I'm going to start screen sharing now. For the new arrivals, just so you know, this meeting or this webinar will be recorded. So, you know, if you have a little bit of stage fright, maybe use the chat box. We'll get to those items later. But yeah, let's go ahead and delve into this. Okay, so here's the topic, turning your enthusiasm into an enterprise. Many of us have probably, particularly those of us coming from rural areas, from farms, you know, we've seen our parents or our mothers, or so we've seen them do gardens, and, you know, we enjoyed the fresh vegetables, particularly when it was a few weeks before we got back into town. And, you know, the vegetables that came from town, either they were already in bad shape when they made it to the store, or, you know, they didn't hold very long when they made it back to the farm. So most of us grew up with a garden. And for me, it was always something that I wanted to do at some point, to have a garden that feeds me and my family. But then also I saw the opportunity, because I had the resources available, to actually produce enough food to actually, you know, share it with other people that are willing to pay for good food. And that was really the start for this all. You know, we've got a big variety of people here on this call tonight, and I really think there's a lot of backgrounds that are, you know, presented here. Some of us already have experience with gardens, curious about marketing that produce. Others are only wanting to start out. So I really wanted to start with square one. What are the thoughts that you should go through, the thought process? Is this for me? And this is something that I'm going to start with. Here, quick look over the topics we want to cover tonight: how to plan your enterprise, then land infrastructure and design. I think that is a critical part, of course, before you get started. Looking at your soil and water quality, and then deciding on what crops to select that you want to garden with. Some of us have maybe an interest in fruit trees and agroforestry. That's a topic that has been quite heavily discussed over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to talk more about a regular vegetable garden, but yeah, that's something you can also take into account. Then going into logistics and marketing. That's the part that many of you will probably have little experience and exposure. So I'm going to try to share with you my experiences there and things to consider. I definitely want to also discuss organic certification. It has its own angle on the marketing part of your produce. So if you want to consider that, we're going to talk about some aspects there. And then ultimately considering further diversification. If you are on a farm, chances are you will not only have a garden, you may also have some chicken or some other livestock there. Maybe you want to do some tourism, or you have some other resources that you can actually sell for money. When we drive into town, there's usually some extra space. So can you use that? All right, is this for me? So when you start out, you really need to, do some meditation. Is this something that I'm ready for? How do I go about my decision making? Am I taking all the factors into account? And I think one of the very critical aspects that many people that do not last with a market garden enterprise is they basically delved into it with a lot of enthusiasm, and they realized later on, no, this is not for me. So how about gaining experience at another operation? Many people that have functioning gardens have some limited ability to actually take somebody, a fellow gardener, a fellow organic farmer, a fellow Namibian under their arms and showing them what it's all about. What really this offers you is the opportunity to develop your skills without having the full responsibility on your own shoulders. What are the days looking like? How's the routine? Are you ready for the backbreaking work of actually building a compost heap and turning that? Or can you deal with, a 2-hour session of weeding? Or, do you really just like nibbling on little berries that are sitting on your strawberry plant? Chances are that you will have some eye-opening experience when you work on somebody else's farm and getting a hang of the routine and see how that operation is actually working. And then you also get the chance to actually talk to the other people that are there, that are actually doing some of the other work, or you talk to the operator, get an opportunity to discuss opportunities with them. So if you have the opportunity to share such an experience, do it by all means. It's really critical also that you make sure that you understand how such an operation, how all the cogs and wheels turn before you actually taking the deep plunge into this.
Absolutely.
So start small to test the concept. This is something that when you are on your farm and you already have an operation, in order to get your thing going, don't start too big. That's really one word of caution that I can give you. Start with something that you alone and maybe 1 or 2 staff members can handle, because I tell you very quickly, it gets too much when you start putting your seeds in the ground and this stuff starts to grow. Everything is hunky-dory. But as you continue through your cycle of your crops, you see it's a very, very complex affair. You have the responsibility for an ecosystem under your management. You see that some plants are actually ready to harvest and others you already have to think about planting them again. And, you know, on the one side, you may have somebody asking, you know, where's my lettuce? When in turn, you don't have any lettuce at the moment because it all started to bolt already in the middle of summer. These are considerations that you will really, they get out of hand very quickly and use customers very quickly when you start too big. Maybe your finances allow you to go big right from the get-go. Don't delve into it right away all big. Maybe it's a good idea to keep a side job before you get going with a big operation, just to make sure that you get a good handle on this. When you're ready to scale up, then you go for it. You know, you got the routine, you know what's going to happen when. You probably have worked through all four seasons, or the 2 seasons, summer and winter, because fall and spring don't really happen very long here. But when you're ready, you will feel, okay, I'm ready to take on the next step. I want to put on another layer. I want to add another garden, or I want to expand my space that I have. But you really need to get a grasp of all the moving parts. It's not just all, you know, fun stuff in the garden and harvesting. It's also paperwork in the back, taking orders, marketing. I also want to talk to you later on about the time spent on selling. That is a critical bottleneck that many of us don't really have a good idea about, how much time it actually takes to sell. Okay, then, you know, how do you turn your dream into something that's tangible? So get an idea about what your needs are. You have to set up a type of a business plan. You need to look at how big you want to go, what structures you want to erect in order to be able to produce from the garden. And then you're working also on some goals. Set yourself some goals so you can work towards them. Sometimes it makes it much easier to make decisions early in the game to make sure that, you know, your 2-year goal or your 5-year goal is coming closer and closer. You already have to make decisions now that will affect my 5-year goal because I'm already in year 3. Set yourself also an annual budget if you can. I'll be honest with you, I personally do not work with a budget. I'm kind of a fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy. But it's a good idea to actually have a budget, especially when you're looking at your, let's say, your shade net structure, and you can see, okay, these shade nets are getting a little bit flimsy, or I've got more and more holes here in my shade netting that I need to replace quite soon. How do I budget that in there? How do I set the money aside for that? So make sure you get a budget going. There's many good resources on the internet. This is not something that's just you know, special to Namibia. Resources from the internet will be for other parts of the world. So take advantage of them. They're the good resources out there to do farming budgets. And then, you know, also with keeping that in mind, that your particular situation may be totally different from that of your neighbor. Then how do you secure funding? Here in Namibia, we have not only our commercial banks, but we also got Agribank, and potentially also some funders that say, you know what, you not only have a good business plan, but you also got the guts and the physical means to make this happen and turning this into an enterprise. Agribank is offering really good funding options, but their money runs out relatively early in each funding cycle. So make sure that you get into that loop early if you need to secure funding from a bank to take advantage of those special interest rates. And make sure that you also got your ducks in a row. Maybe you have a qualification in the back, in the back pocket, or you have, you know, you've attended some courses and you've got some attendance certificates that will actually definitely help you to make sure that your banker takes you seriously and listens to your proposal. Same thing with any angel funding or so. You know, really make sure that your business plan is bulletproof. And then it's always good if you actually investing yourself with some own funding, maybe some family willing to fund part of your operation, or you actually have that side income that I talked about earlier. Before you go full steam into your operation, maybe it's not such a bad idea to still keep a side job until you're ready to really go into it full time. It is and can be very profitable to have a market garden, but it's also easy to make very expensive mistakes. I hope I cover those tonight. Okay, the big capital expenditures to look at. I think here in Namibia, very few of us will try to do a market garden without a shade net structure. So you have to make that decision quite early in the game. Do your costing. Check who are the suppliers for these shade net structures. You know that the Living Earth projects, we are working on putting together the greenhouse in the box. That is one option that you have. You can do it yourself as well. None of the things that we do, you cannot do yourself. However, we Living Earth, we're really trying to work with people that are willing to, to go the way with us. And, our ultimate goal is to get Namibia to be self-sufficient as far as food and nutrition is concerned. Should you go for tunnels, those round-topped structures with, with the plastic netting on top, then you're looking at probably having to do climate control in your tunnel. These tunnels work quite well if you're going for specialty items such as English cucumbers. They have the need for a very short climate. Or do you want to go open? Do you want to plant mealies on a large scale, or butternuts, things like that? Anything out of the cucurbit family, watermelons, pumpkins, those are probably better off outside. These type of plants usually do need pollinators. Same thing with fruit forest. So these are considerations to take into account before you start your capital planning. Then what type of irrigation will you choose? Do you go for drip irrigation? Do you go for sprinklers? Do you go for a big, one of those round irrigation circles? Depending on your size of your land and how specialized or diversified you want to do your operation, your irrigation will be a critical part of that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Then looking at tools and equipment. Do you want to work with hand tools? In the 18 by 24 greenhouse in the box concept that we are envisioning as a starter pack, so to say, your hand tools will be probably enough. You don't need much more than hand tools. But if you go for a larger scale operation, when you're looking at a hectare or above, you may want to actually have a little garden tractor that's going to help you work through your land. That's sometimes quite helpful. Or you start to work with maybe a compost turner or something like that. And then another big consideration that many of us forget at the beginning: where does your staff come from? When you're living in the rural areas, chances are your staff will be living with you on your land. Or do they come from a village close by? Do you have to arrange for transport for them? Transport is also another consideration that basically fits in here if you have to bring your produce to the market yourself with your own vehicle. So keep that in mind when you're planning your capital expenditure. Some of these you can pay off with specialty loans like car loans or staff housing, but the other parts have their own type of amortization schedules, be it 5 years or 10 years. So you really need to get a handle on that and make a good business plan before you start into this adventure. Fixed assets, land and infrastructure. And this is something that also here in Namibia so often farmers, small-scale farmers, think that they need to have their own land. But let's look at this a little bit closer. First of all, before you pick a place that is ideal for your market garden, make sure you have some markets within reach. Each year we hear wonderful but also horror stories about people that have produce up, let's say, in the Kavango area. They've got beautiful mangoes that are ripe and then overripe and then they're rotten. They just don't have a market for it, or they basically have to sell them at dumping prices because there's simply no market close by that can offtake it. So make sure you got, when you start your operation, that you've got some markets close by or at least within reach via vehicle, or you've got maybe the support structure with the transport operation that can take your produce to market. That's a consideration you really need to take into account before you say, I'm going to do this big piece of land. And later on you sit, I've heard, for example, a story of somebody sitting with 5 hectares of butternut, and they were looking for customers starting to harvest these. I mean, that's a horror story. You know, at that point, the wholesaler will say, you know what I'm going to do with 5 hectares worth of butternuts? You know, you really need to plan this well ahead in advance and make sure you've got a way to get it there, or at least store it in such a way that you can find your customers if you're really planning too late. Some of you may have also seen this post that I posted on the groups about the roots grapes and the apples that are getting close to harvest now. My contact there, my friend that's working there, he says that at this stage they have not yet secured the off-takers for this produce. It's scary to think that many people are not taking this particular matter into consideration. So do know who your market is. Also check your suppliers. Most of the supplies that I need come here from town, from Windhoek. The other day I needed to get some packaging material on marine towel. Guess what? I didn't find any there. So also have an idea how you're going to take care of that part of your operation. Then do you have a piece of land that has appropriate size that you can also scale up on later on? Is the access good? In my case, I don't have ideal access. From my farm into Windhoek is 220 kilometers, of which 130 kilometers, more than half of it is gravel road. You know, this is not ideal. I'll be very honest with you. When you bring your produce into town and it's bruised fruit or whatever, you know, and it gets rejected at your clients, then you know you're not going to be in good shape. So make sure that you have a relatively good access from your farm to your market. Great, this is important. You know, if you have a sloping area that you have to do your garden on, and you know, the grade really affects irrigation, and it affects your operating of your garden and so on. For this type of thing, you don't want a view. You don't need to get a fancy view for a market garden. What you want is flat land with a relatively good substrate soil. Make sure you have an idea what's happening underneath the soil, the top layer. Do you have rocks underneath, or do you have deep sand? What do you need to do in order to prepare land for this garden? And then the big question, to own or to rent. I think that's one challenge that many people have not really taken in account before they started with this. They said, you know, I've now got, you know, maybe an inheritance of a few $100,000 or something. And the first thing they did is they purchased the land. Good for you. But if you get a loan from AgriBank, and the first thing you do is buy land, and then you don't have money left over to erect your shade net structure and to buy the tools and to erect staff housing, your money runs out very, very quickly. Sometimes it's better to actually rent the piece of land that you have your garden on, because you are going to have a much better cash flow situation. The income that you get from your produce will actually pay your operation. And when you're ready to buy, then you'll know this is the right time. You see that your funds are accumulating, your profit margin is so wide that you actually are able to save money. And then you can really wait for the perfect piece of land. It's close to your market, close to your suppliers, and has the absolute perfect type of soil that you can put your garden on. So take this stuff into consideration so you don't make an expensive mistake. Okay, this is a permaculture chat. So let's talk about permanence in agriculture. The piece of land that you have, and many of us are working with relatively large tracts of land. We are on farms that are sizable. But even with a 5 or 10 hectare plot, you've got a lot of opportunity to expand and to plan your operation. But you also have to take into account how to plan this when you buy or you rent an existing operation, to make sure that you don't make common mistakes. One of the common mistakes that I'm facing on my farm is that I work with 3 gardens and they are all walking distance from one another, but those walking distances, they do add up through the day. And I catch myself and also catch my staff that some of these walking parts of the day get a little bit too cumbersome. The distance from one garden to the next one is just a little bit too far. So sometimes things get dropped or a garden gets a bit neglected because it's just a little bit off the beaten track. So if you can plan properly. First thing to consider is really which is your main growing space. You've decided on a shade net structure or a tunnel or your open garden. And then you do the layout with your spacing. Make sure that you've got a really good access to all your beddings. Make sure you make provision for the irrigation and water infrastructure. That all needs to come into place. You have to know where your water is coming from and how it's getting into your garden, because we don't have rain-fed gardens here in Namibia. So your water access is a very, very critical part of your planning. If you have already an existing borehole, maybe also an existing reservoir or a pump, make sure that ties in nicely with your system. And you don't just need water for your garden, you also need it later on for washing your produce potentially. So keep that in mind. And of course also for your housing. Keep your tools and equipment in a place that's close to your work. I don't want to tell you how many times I've had to look for a particular piece of tool that I had to get from another garden, and there comes a point I say, screw this, I'm going to do this afternoon, or I'm going to shout for somebody to get this tool for me. Not pleasant. So make sure that you get a good tool shed in your garden close by, or someplace where it's really convenient for you. Another thing that I can really recommend to you is to plan right from the get-go a space where you do seed starting. If you look at some larger operations, you see that the seed starting space is at a spot that was basically a little bit thought about after the fact. But think about your seed starting space right from the get-go, because from your seedling house to your garden should not be a long distance. It should be somewhere where it's enough shelter and yet close enough to your gardens that you do the transplanting into. Then, of course, critical part, wash, pack, and store. To have a building close by that your vehicle, potentially if you're taking your produce yourself to your market, that is not too far away. If you walk from your garden and you have a long distance to your pack store, that is not ideal. That's also where it really pays off to look at other people's operations and think about, what do I not like about this? Why is, what is the experience of the operator there? The good or bad experience with this type of short distances between the different parts of your operation. Critical also, staff and ablutions. How far away is your staff living in order to come to work? And more important, so during the workday, do you have ablutions close by, or do you realize after a couple of weeks? I have a lot of absentee employees because when they have to go to the bathroom, they have to go halfway across, at the farm in order to relieve themselves. Probably not a good idea. So plan that right from the get-go to make sure that you don't make that mistake. And then last but not least, can you scale your operation? When you really got the hang of your operation and you're ready to go bigger, make sure that you thought about your expansion plans right from the beginning. Here's a picture that's actually a screenshot out of a market garden, a 5-part series on YouTube from John Martin Fortier. He's a Canadian market gardener. A lot of great ideas on that series of YouTube videos. So just a thought that you can use for your planning. I like the 75 centimeter wide beddings. The space in the middle, 45 centimeters, is a little bit tight for my taste, but you can work with what you have. Just think about one thing, that most of our shade net structures are working with 3-meter blocks, or actually 6-meter blocks from pole to pole, because the shade net rolls, they come in 3-meter widths. And you basically want to create a structure that fits into this 6 by 6 meter block structure to make sure you maximize your space also with your irrigation. Take a piece of a drafting or graph paper and make sure that you really draw it on there and work with those little blocks until you have a system that you really like. Also talk to some other people that have already established their gardens and see what works for them and what doesn't. If I had known this when I started out, I probably would not have made some of the mistakes that I have done. So I can really give you this advice as you go into this. Okay, I already touched on this. When you choose your land, how's your water situation? How's the soil? The soil is really the foundation of your garden. Of course, when we as a human species have really screwed up here on the planet Earth and we have to go to Mars and we can look at vertical gardens in our spaceships. But until then, I think most of our food will be grown in soil. To get going, test your soil. Maybe you even, before you consider going onto a piece of land, you test your soil beforehand. You just take a couple of good soil samples. Here in Namibia, we've got the great resource of the GIZ Soil Lab up at Rundu. Paulus Musongo, who's up there with his partner, they do a good soil test, a good basic soil test for $200. I mean, that's the cheapest investment you can imagine to make sure that you know from the get-go what your soil looks like, what your challenges are, and how you will address it later on. If you want to invest a little bit more money, you can also send your soil sample to South Africa or even overseas and have it tested there. But for beginners' sake, this local soil test is absolutely adequate. It will give you a good idea of how you need to correct and amend your soil to make sure that you have a good medium that your plants can grow in. Ideal, of course, is a loamy, sandy soil that has water holding capacity. Your pH you can actually manage quite well through different types of interventions with compost and so on. This is not a gardening course tonight, so I'm not going to go too deep into this, but you can actually amend your soil in such a way that you can improve challenges that you have on pH and nutrient-wise. Most important thing in my eyes is to continue to add organic matter to your soil. It will really pay you back because it has improved water holding capacity. It has good drainage ability if you're having too much water, if you have a heavy rainstorm. and it will also help you create resilience to grow resilient plants. It's a critical part to have enough organic matter of anywhere between 5 and 10%. It sounds like a lot. Most Namibian soils have less than 2%, less than 1% of organic matter. But as you amend your soil with cow dung or with wood chips or with mulch or with, you know, just the roots of your old plants, your organic matter will increase.
Eckhart, just a reminder, you have about 15 minutes. And then,
say again?
I'm saying you have about 15 minutes left. Then we go into the Q&A and discussions with the participants.
All right. All right, I'm gonna push because we've got still a good bit to cover. Testing your water for pH and quality. Options here in Windhoek are either NamWater or analytical soil laboratories. And there's apparently a third laboratory that I'm not aware of, but just ask on one of the groups where to test it. Make sure you got enough water. If you don't have that much water, you possibly don't want to have one of these sprinklers, but go over to only drip irrigation. Make sure that you know particularly what your content of calcium carbonate is, calc, limestone. If you have scaling in your drip irrigation, it will give you a lot of headaches. So avoid drip irrigation if you have high calcium carbonate content in your water. Okay, choosing your crops. The more diverse your garden operation is, the more resilient your base of your operation. Make sure you've got a market for your produce. I still remember Hanyo Lul, who presented a couple of months ago. He said he planted the most beautiful broccoli up at Rundu, and then he didn't have any customers for it because the local population just didn't know what broccoli was used for, that you could eat that stuff. So make sure you've got a market for your produce. Make sure it's suitable for your conditions. That if you grow a vegetable that is very, very touchy, try to stay away from that if it's not suitable for your maybe particularly sunny conditions, or you don't have enough sun for it or something like that. So look at those needs. Pest resistance. Many of the leafy vegetables are quite popular here in Namibia, and they're actually quite pest resistant. Same thing goes for onions. Make sure it's profitable. It doesn't need a whole lot of input, a whole lot of work in order to be profitable. If I had to plant again, I, for example, would not plant any strawberries. Okay, couple of, I'm going to really go very quickly through these examples that I put in here. Lettuce, popular in summer, but really likes winter weather, needs very low fertility, and it's a fast grower. It's critical that you bring it to market as fresh as possible. So basically you harvest it the day before you bring it to market. I've never seen any pests on my lettuces, so that's a great plus for it. And for the right customer, it's very profitable. Leeks. This is something that many Namibians don't know. It's a plant out of the onion family, quite popular and profitable with European customers. This past season, I actually planted a lot of leeks, and I was apparently one of the only producers that actually had it on a regular basis available. So people came from far and wide and purchased our leeks. Also, relatively low fertility needs. I've grown it in almost red sand on my garden, and it did very well. But it's a slow grower. Doesn't need a lot of space, and really no pest pressure. The only caveat I have with this, when it's springtime, actually this time of year, they shoot flowers. So this is the time of year when you do not have leeks. Something to keep in mind. Tomatoes. This is a crop that's very popular, and I hate tomatoes. I'll be very honest with you. It's a heavy feeder, needs a very, very good soil. If your irrigation is not right, it is prone to bursting. You have a lot of pest pressure on this crop. A lot of, they will immediately show if you have some nutrient deficiencies in your soil. I have gone over to only planting cherry tomatoes. They're quite profitable and they're easy seller, but tomatoes, be careful. Beans, another one that's quite popular, and it's a critical part of your crop rotation. Very little disease pressure and quite profitable. Carrots, I grow these colorful carrots, very popular. Also, low fertility needs, but it needs very good soil. So if you have clay in your soil, don't try to do carrots unless you amend it with a lot of organic material. Relatively low disease susceptibility and low space requirement as well. And if you plant in the right season, it grows quite fast. A consideration for Namibia is to grow specialty high-value crops. Okay, particularly if you're selling into ethnic communities that have specialty needs. You know, let's talk about, for example, the Asian markets, or you sell to German-speaking customers and so on. Then you should go for some specialty high-value crops. I've listed just a few, and we can continue with this list probably with more. Garlic, ginger, asparagus, berries are always popular, and then I mentioned already the ethnic foods. What's on the picture here is a kohlrabi that's quite popular with Germans. I still have some in the garden. I didn't get a good picture of it when they were in their best shape. This one is already, you can see the pest pressure is getting quite high, but the crop is still in good shape. All right, here's something that I really want to put close to your heart. Make sure that you maximize your space, because if your capital expenditure into your greenhouse structure is considerable, you really need to think about square meters. How much did it cost you to erect that square meter? So have a good idea of how you plan your crop sequence through the seasons. Make sure you look at your summer crops, your winter crops, when to start putting the seed into the soil. You should really consider seed starting early, because while you're still harvesting from your garden bed, you can already have the next crop growing in your seedling house and transplant it as soon as you're done with harvesting your other crop. Make sure you incorporate good companion planting and crop rotation. That's something that you will hear about in any good basic garden course. It's an essential part to be successful. Think about integrating layers. You know, if you're planting, this is really something that also has to do with companion planting. You can actually, when you go through the syntropic agroforestry concepts, you will hear a lot more about that. I can delve more into this, but this is probably something that will take up too much time for this purpose, especially with Rupura reminding me about time. Should you consider organic certification? You know, here the 3 tenements of permaculture: earth care, people care, and fair share, speaks very directly to organic. And there is some real advantages for ethical productions. So the big pros are you've got a very positive supply and demand dynamic. There's usually less producers than there are consumers for this. So you're basically putting yourself into the position of the price maker and not the price taker. Market access. If you sell into a supermarket or into a wholesaling environment, and they get the same type of produce from an organic versus a conventional producer, chances are they will give the organic produce the preference. Then if you have other products from your land, for example, in my case, I sell drinking water from my farm. Chances are that your other products will actually benefit from organic certification of your garden crops, because they know there's no harmful chemicals in that water. And technically, once you got your good soil established, you have very low physical input costs. The cons, what speaks against it? Cost of certification is quite high. Here in Namibia, we've got a staggered approach where over 4 years you get to the full price of certification of $3,200. when you're looking at certification for export, you're easily talking about 10 to 15 times as high. So that's where you really have to work at scale in order to make it worthwhile. Then there's a conversion period that can be 2 years, sometimes 3 years if you're talking about perennial plants. It's also quite a long time to wait before you can start reaping the benefits of organic certification. The standards, I'll be very honest with you, are sometimes quite rigid, and they do not take some of the local conditions into account. So talk to somebody who's been through it before you consider this. And then, of course, this is no big surprise. While it's low in input costs, you have a lot of labor that you need to put into this. Okay, what happens after harvest?
Eckhart, I'll give you 10 more minutes.
Oh,
you have until
you.
8:40.
Okay, thank you.
This is really good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to keep at my pace then. When to harvest? Certain of your produce will be able to harvest through the week, and others really need to be harvested just before your harvest, before your market day. So make sure that you understand what goes where and how you store it in the meantime. What happens after harvest? You know, when you've pulled that piece of lettuce or you pulled your carrot out of the soil, how do you prepare it to make sure it has good shelf life for your customer? So for example, carrots or radishes, you know, don't put the leaves on there. Sometimes I really cringe when I see pictures of the market where you've got the carrots lying there with all the green still on top of it. Sorry, it doesn't work in Namibia. Those leaves will continue to draw water out of your carrot, and after half a day, it will be as limp as, I don't know, a Vienna sausage maybe. So make sure you do your preparation for packaging proper. Each vegetable has its own needs there, so make sure you understand that. Controlled atmosphere, that's something that we don't use really much in Namibia, but it's basically where you change the air that's in your packaging to where you have a higher content of CO2, carbon dioxide, or maybe even nitrogen, something we don't really do much here. However, when you do good packaging, you should have a very good clean air, and your produce should be in such a shape that it's not, there's no bad or already rotting produce in there. If you have any parts that are not fit for consumption, don't put them in your packaging. They'll spoil the whole package right away. So have good humidity control. Of course, your plants should be looking healthy. And you see this package here of our lettuce. One thing that amazes me sometimes is that these pillow packs, if it's properly sealed, it starts to puff up as it lies in the fridge, because those produce, the produce that's in there is still actually living. It's still producing oxygen. It's still actually alive, and that's really something that's amazing to me. But you can only do that if you have proper humidity control, not too much moisture, but enough in there for your produce to keep looking well. You can do pH control. For those of you on the call, a little secret. If you put a lettuce pillow pack like we do here, rinse it with a little bit of citric acid in the rinse water. It will keep from browning, and it will also make sure that your lettuce will look fresh even a week after it's been in the fridge. Good cooling, 2 to 4 degrees centigrade. You can also put some of your veggies maybe into a cold or a wet cloth in order to get it to market. But this is, of course, a proper cool room or fridges or whatever to make sure that you do not have too high temperatures. In Namibia, this is very critical, also taking your produce to market if you do that part yourself. I know that, for example, if you're selling into the SPAR supermarket chain and also to the wholesalers, they will definitely demand that you as the producer or your transporter will have a cooling truck that's actively cooled. That cooling chain from the producer to the market needs to be maintained as good as possible. What I do in my case, I actually use cooler boxes. We usually have the cool produce, we put it as cold as it is in the mornings into the cooler boxes, those expensive ones that you get at Simot or at Bakovitz or so. And they actually keep very well into the market, but that would not be acceptable to a super spar or to a Namibian fresh produce market. Okay, this is a graphic that I want to really make sure that you, before we get into pricing, that you have to understand. If you see a kilogram of onions being sold at your supermarket for $18 and you say that's the money that I want to take, you have to understand that before that $18 price is justified on the shelf, who else is part of the value chain that also needs to get their share? So at the bottom, we're looking at what we as the producers have to look at. We have input costs, we have labor, packaging. We need to probably buy some fuel if we do some part of the transport or for our machinery, for cooling. Then your overheads, your administrative costs. Maybe you still have to pay off a loan for your greenhouse, for example. And then if you're profitable, you have to pay tax. That's just the lay of the land. And then if all goes well, you should have a pretty good profit margin. In my case, and I'm not the best market gardener, but I can honestly tell you that over the last years, I've been able to maintain about 25% profitability. I know of some others that have really maximized their space. They can easily come up to 50%. Maybe not easily, but they can. So keep that in mind. Part of the $18 per kilo onions goes over to logistics, the transport, cooling. Then the wholesaler takes a cut out of it. If you're going to the wholesalers in your local town, then our government wants to have 15% VAT from that sales price. If you are registered at the NAB, you need to pay the levy to them. It's also part of the fair share. They do a lot for the growers, but they also need to pay that from somewhere. And last but not least, you've got the retailer with the neon lights and the shelving and the cooling and the staff and all that. They all need to get a part of this $18 per kilo of onions. So make sure that you understand that your farm gate price before your produce leaves the land is at a fair about 50% of what the retailer will charge at their space. If you're expecting more, we're looking at the next one. This is the informal value chain. Again, at the bottom, your costs will not change much. Chances are you will take on your logistics yourself. You will take your produce to your market yourself. You don't have a wholesaler anymore. Some of us decide maybe to not pay any taxes on this stuff. We basically just work cash only. So I've taken that one out. Although there is a caveat with this. If you decide to pay cash only and you don't want to pay taxes, at some point you may generate an income where it becomes difficult to explain to the receiver of revenue why you're making a lot of money and why you're driving a new car, but you're always showing a loss in your operation. So be careful with that. The other thing is make a good analysis of your costs versus your income, because otherwise you also sometimes line yourself into a negative zone, something that many people that I know are not declaring or not having a good bookkeeping system. They make that mistake and they mess up there. So if you go to open market, I know that the large towns, they all got open markets. Here in Windhoek, we've got the green market, we've got the market at the village, and then there's a lot of street markets out there. One thing to really keep in mind when you're going this route with the informal value chain, you market directly to your customer. Keep in mind how much time you have in order to sell your produce yourself. Are you an expert in growing food or are you a good marketer? It's a rare person amongst us that is good in both these qualities. But remember, each hour that you spend behind a market stand, you're not on your land. You're not in control over what you're growing. Okay, so you really need to make sure that if you spend the time to bring your produce to market yourself, and you're standing at the market, let's say at the green market on a Saturday morning, you need to really make sure that somebody is still at your farm and producing the vegetable in the same good quality that you would do if you were there. So make sure you make that calculation, that decision very smartly, because otherwise you may actually make a costly mistake and your operation will go the wrong way around. It's something I cannot really emphasize enough. Make sure you understand how much of the value chain you as a producer want to take over and how much of it you're willing to give away to get other people also a fair share. Okay, couple resources to find prices. Of course, you can go to your local supermarket, or you can walk around the green market and see what other people are selling the produce for, or you can have somebody like the NAB do this price report for you. You can go on the NAB website and you can find the monthly price report. It's relatively up to date. It shows you what the market is doing with little arrows. And it gives you a good idea of what you can reasonably expect for your produce. The NAB is actually protecting the local growers with the MSP, so you can maybe have a trader that will take off your produce because they still need to get this 47% local produce margin before they can start to import from South Africa. That's an advantage for us Namibian growers. Are you basically planting a commodity crops? You see these hawkers here sitting with a bunch of potatoes there, maybe a bunch of butternut or a bunch of cabbages, or are you going into a specialty space where you're really becoming the price maker because you're the only one or two producer that have a specialty crop? Doing your market intelligence also involves talking with your customers to see if something is not moving right, to talking to them and ensuring that your price is still in line with what they expect. Emo had the other day an example of the $25 kilogram of strawberries. You know, those are rare anecdotes. It can happen, but it's not common. Okay. What can we do to profit, to enhance our profits, to optimize it? Do good branding. If you have a good thing going, choose a good logo, choose a good label that you put on your produce to make sure that your customer knows that they're getting your produce and not that of somebody else. So much of our produce we buy in the supermarket is just the generic that comes maybe from plastic packaging or someplace like that. I talked about keeping a clean accounting system. Keep a good tab of what you're selling and what you're paying for it, for your input costs, for your labor, and for your other things, because that will also help you to really make sure that you do not keep going with an unprofitable line, or that you have something that's taking up a lot of space but not carrying its fair share of your operation. If you have an overproduction of anything, be it cabbages, turning them into sauerkraut, or having a lot of tomatoes that you actually should be canning or doing sun-dried tomatoes, consider that to optimize your profit. Niche marketing, you know, if you have a particular customer base that really wants a particular type of produce, try and do that. Volunteers, another opportunity to really optimize your profit is to take on some volunteers, either from international or local. We have a lot of students that need work experience, that work basically for free. So, you know, consider doing that, but also understand, even if you don't pay them a salary or not a full salary except for pocket money, make sure that you spend the time with these people that to make sure that they don't make expensive mistakes. You know, transplanting your tomatoes and not watering them after transplanting, that can cost you weeks and weeks worth of production if you have mistakes happening there. So yeah, there's some trade-offs there, but possibly some also good opportunities. And something in Namibia that we should consider in future cooperatives. It's a topic I don't have much experience with yet, but it's something that has a lot of opportunity. Okay, and I think that's it. I'm not sure what says the time. 8:41, not too bad.
Perfect, Eckhart. Thank you so much for that. I allowed you so much time because I feel like you were answering many of the questions that we have as you were going along. And that is why we wanted to grant you enough time to just go through it and say whatever you have to say. Thank you so much. So we are now open for questions. We have 20 minutes. From the chat, we have Karen who asked about setup costs. I think she means what are the average setup costs if you like, let's say a small garden, tunnels, irrigation, stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. And the reason why I really put in the figures on that is because, as usually in permaculture or in any agriculture, it depends. But I can tell you that Peter Allen had actually asked me about the costing model for the greenhouse in the box concept. If you want to do this yourself and you want to do the 18 by 24 shade net structure and you do the labor yourself, you're probably going to look with everything involved, the tools involved, you can probably start with as little as $25,000 if you have the land. Yeah, that's to give you a ballpark figure there. Once we really start pushing the greenhouse in the box concept, you will see that it's a lot more money because we will also contribute with mentoring with market access and things like that. Those are non-tangible items that are worth a lot. And you have to make sure that even though it is more expensive getting going, it will probably save you some very heavy expenses later on. But so I think with 25 grand, you can get going with a good market garden.
Wonderful. I think that answers Karen's question. Anybody with a question, you can unmute your mic and just ask.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you acoustically.
No, I'm saying anybody that has a question can unmute your mic and just ask.
All right, great. Peter
Karen,
Allen?
go for it. Ladies first.
Okay, Karen?
No, thanks. I asked my question already. It was answered. It's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions. Let's say with how many staff do you have currently?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good question. So I've got an established garden. I don't have much infrastructure projects needed. And that's something I also want to share with you. If you have a good shade net structure erected properly, you will get at least 10 years of good life out of it. All right. So you've got 10 years where you do not have to work on shade net repairs, where you don't have to replace posts and stuff like that. I currently, most of the time, have one full-time person in the garden. And then the other staff, as we have time, we do weeding. I do a lot of the seed starting and transplanting myself. And that's one of the weaknesses of my operation, that I really need to have my other staff do that more regularly to make sure it does happen. I've had some really good experiences with volunteers that came from outside that already had the skills from their schools or universities, and they did that work for me. It really helped me to get my back open so I didn't have to do that part. But yeah, to get back to your question, let's say 1.5 to 2 permanent staff. Okay. And that's with 0.6 hectares.
Okay, thanks, Eckhart. Do you could you share just on a bit of your infrastructure? Do you have greenhouses? Do you have nets? Do you have plastic greenhouses? It's open.
Yes, I work exclusively with shade net structures for the market garden. And I also have an outside area where I'm starting to develop a fruit orchard. I've basically got some pairs of trees that I planted there. It's kind of a sideline project and something that I see a lot of opportunity for the future. Also managed organically, but the tunnels, again, as I said earlier, the tunnels here in Namibia with the plastics, I think they work great where you are at the coast, because when you actually need it to be a little bit warmer, I think those tunnels work better. Yeah. But I've seen these tunnels also here in the central parts of Namibia, for example, at Namak Roses. And then I see these big blowers that have to blow air into those spaces in order to keep the temperature below 35 degrees Celsius in the summer. And I'm sorry, that does not make much sense. The shade structures are the most bang for the buck, in my opinion.
Okay, thanks. Tell me, if you're comfortable, just with your experience around this, what do you think the potential is for a turnover on a half hectare, if you set into it already? Just to get an idea what if it could be worth it or not for people that want to go leave their jobs or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to guesstimate here, and that was a question I actually should have prepared myself better for. So I would say my turnover at the moment in my diversified operation from the garden is about $10,000 a month. So that would be $120,000 a year. But also keeping in mind that that we on the farm, that we eat from that garden as well. Yeah. And it's an operation that's not yet as fully optimized as it could be. I think with 0.6 hectares, I think about twice of that would be possible. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, to give you an idea there.
Okay, almost done. Just on your cooling facilities on the farm, what do you use? How do you cool or keep your produce fresh when you harvest it before the market?
Yes, it's a very critical and good question, and I've emphasized that during the presentation. I'm in the Kalahari. I'm not on NAM Power or on NAM Water, so I basically use solar power exclusively for for my electricity needs, and I actually work with high efficiency regular fridges. I don't have cool rooms. Cool rooms are not very effective to keep cold, and if you have to run a cool room from a solar system, not a good idea. But if you do have NAM power, definitely go for the cool rooms. You can store your crates in there. You can put shelving in there. And sometimes I wish I had a lot more space. That's one of the constraints that I currently have. I don't have enough cooling space for my production. And that's why we also do quite a bit of processing on the farm, because it's easier to have a shelf-stable canned product than a fresh produce that I take into my cooler boxes on a Monday morning.
Okay, last question. Thanks. What were the people's response when you actually started approaching them and saying, "Listen, you got this products. Would they want to sell?" What was the initial response from your clients now?
You know what? It was overwhelmingly positive. When you approach your customer, be it a customer or be it a trader, I usually work with intermediaries. I like to give 20% profit margin away for somebody that's selling my produce for me. I'm not somebody who's going to come on a Saturday morning and stand at the green market, because it makes no sense for me having to go home on a Saturday afternoon. So every trader that I talked to said, yes, I want your product, and you just send me your prices and we'll sell it for you. I've rarely had the situation where they said this is too expensive, or no, I don't want this, or I'm not going to take your produce. I've got a rather unique customer base. I sell 20 to 25% to private customers. I do not advertise to them whatsoever to the private customers. Those are basically people that I know personally that only want my produce. And then I work with here in Windhoek with four, actually in this particular case, it's 4 ladies that sell out of their garages, usually through a WhatsApp group or through an online marketplace. And they take care of the logistics, where I basically come on a Monday afternoon and I drop off my produce there, and they basically deal with the customers. They're taking the orders and paying once a week or once every 2 weeks. And, that's the agreement that we have. But back to your question, when I offer something, it usually sells.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Wonderful, Eckhart. Thank you, Peter Allen, for those amazing questions. We have one of our participants want to know how can they combat spider mites. They are struggling to plant tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplants due to spider mites.
Yeah, I have that challenge as well. And I can tell you from my own experience, spider mite does not need a poison. What they need is a different atmosphere. Spider mites usually come up when your plants, number one, are starting to become old. They're no longer able to be to maintain a good, how shall I say, good humidity around their upper leaves structure. So it's usually the older plants that are affected, number one. Second thing is controlled atmosphere. In this case, you actually keep the area about those affected plant parts, keep it as humid as possible. So you just really take a knapsack sprayer and spray a water mist into the top part of the plant in the mornings and the afternoons, because the red spider mite likes dry, hot conditions. That's where they thrive. So you really only need water and spraying that mist in there, and the spider mite, after 3 or 4 or 5 days, they will start to become less and less. And you just keep doing that, no poison, and you will get rid of it. But also know that particularly your nightshades, which are affected here, when they start to show a lot of spider mites, they're close to the end of the life cycle.
And Ulrika wants to know, what shade net do you use? Which shade net do you use?
Yes, another very good question. 40% black and white is what it's called. I use the products of AllNet. Here in Windhoek, we've got 2 suppliers. One of them is Southern Cross Services in Southern Industrial area, and the other one is Mega Shade up in Northern Industrial. So again, 40% black and white is ideal, but other shade nets will also work. I've got parts of my garden under pure white or pure black shade netting, 30%, that will also work. But for the vast majority of crops, you should be fine with that particular choice, the percent black and white.
Wonderful. We have 5 minutes left, and I also have a question here, and it's revolving around volunteers. At Steps for Children here, we have a lot of volunteers that stay for a maximum of 3 months, and then they want the experience and they want a testimonial to use in their next job applications. But then we hear that there are implications to keeping volunteers too long. There are consequences with the Ministry of Labor and stuff like that. Is that true?
Yes, you have to be very careful with that. The current situation in Namibia is, if you take on volunteers, the Ministry of Home Affairs no longer easily will give you a work permit for more, even if a volunteer is basically not paying or not getting paid for the time with you, but you will struggle to get a work permit for them. That's when you talk about the 90-day period. Those are usually young people, sometimes older people that come in on a tourist visa. And you're in a gray area there as far as the law is concerned, because you're basically, let's be honest with you, you know, you are taking a workspace away from somebody that can work for you. We've got a lot of opportunity here in Namibia with locals that need to get that physical experience on a farm. You know, our VTCs, we've got, you know, 25 VTCs that need to get the volunteers. So take advantage of that.
Okay. I think I will allow Gunther to ask a question. He's been wanting to ask a question for a long time, and then we close off. Gunther?
Gunther?
Yeah, I didn't want to ask a question, so I think it's an accident there.
Okay.
Okay, I didn't want to ask.
Okay, and then I think we can close off for the sake of keeping to the time. Peter Allen, I don't think I can allow you to speak. We are nearing the closing of this Permiechat, and we would like to keep the time and make a habit of it. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. This was a very important conversation to have. A special thank you to Eckhart Förtsch for sharing such valuable insights on what it truly takes to move produce from garden all the way to the marketplace. That was Eckhart. That was a very holistic wrap up of really what it takes to take things from the garden to the market. So thank you very much for your input. Thank you very much for the questions from the participants. And Eckhart, if you want to say something before we close off.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. You know, I really appreciate the opportunity to hold this presentation and to hopefully encourage many of you to actually also consider this for yourselves. And let's keep the conversation going. I'm in the different chats that this group is coming from. So feel free to ask me either privately or on the group, because particularly on those groups, you know, the people asking the questions are probably asking for other people as well. It's better to really keep the conversation going in that way. And as they always say, no question is too stupid except for the one that's not asked.
Exactly. So I think our next Permiechat will be announced on the Permiechat group, and it will also be announced on the NOAA group. So please, guys, be on the alert for our next Permiechat. This is quite amazing. We are learning a lot. And I think this one was also quite awesome. And with that being said, let's close off and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Rapura, for moderating. Appreciate it.
Sure, pleasure.
All right. Bye, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.